everybody. This is Sarah, and you're listening to the Medium Curious podcast, the show with two mediums who are convinced that once you start seeing the big picture, you really can't unsee it. Not that we've ever tried. We've actually definitely not tried. So today is a Sunday solo, so I am missing my sweet Janie Jane. But her last Sunday solo was so good, you guys. She channeled the Walters, who I have known since she's been channeling them, because I remember when they showed up for her. And I'm just so proud that she put that out there. It's so cool. There's so much wisdom that is part of the greater consciousness that we have access to, and she's found a way to access it. And I'm just really happy that she shared that with everybody. And I'm proud of myself today for getting this together because, woo, it's been a week. Who else feels that this week has been super intense? I'm actually recording this today on April 17th. And there is a lot of intensity, stickiness, crunchiness going on right now. A lot of stuff to be grateful for as well. I'm doing a lot of music right now, a lot of rehearsals and performances, which means less mediumship, but it really fills my cup up in a different way. So I'm really grateful for that. And I just had my 20th wedding anniversary. Yeah. So really grateful for the wonderful human that I am married to, who is so open-hearted and supportive and, helps me be here, present in this lifetime. But I wanted to get this out this week because it's not going to be current anymore if I don't. So what really delighted me in the news this past week, which was pretty much the only news I wanted to watch, was the Artemis moon mission. Did anybody else catch some of that? I just loved it so much. The astronauts have been sharing their experiences, and they have been talking about their perspective, how they see the Earth from, is it their rocket ship, their spaceship? I don't know. But they can hold their thumb up and watch the Earth disappear behind it. And it's this gorgeous, stunning gem of a planet floating in dark space. What a freaking miracle the Earth is. And the astronauts were saying that they would look at the Earth and realize that all of mankind was there. And it kind of makes it so apparent that we're all a part of one being. We're so much more similar than we are different. At one of the press conferences, one astronaut said she is just beginning to absorb her experience and everything that she learned from the mission, which I think shows so much wisdom, because so much of our processing involves integrating our lessons over time, not just when we experience them. But looking at the Earth, she said, it's very clear that we're all Earth's crew together. Like, when are we going to learn that? I don't know. Some of us have. And then there's just the sheer magnitude of it, the scope of it. There's all this concentration of exquisite, perfect beauty in one place, with the backdrop of the vastness of all of the space surrounding it. And what a miracle it is for Earth to exist the way it does. It just blows my mind. I think if we can really take that in, really think about that, what does that do to our perspective? One of the astronauts said, it's a special thing to be a human, and it's a special thing to be on planet Earth. And I really feel that that is so true. That magic is what we need right now. It's the medicine right now. And actually, this has been researched, this perspective. It's called the overview effect. Astronauts come back different, less interested in the material, borders, conflict, and more interested in connection and meaning. Does that sound familiar to you guys? So what are some of the other things that can give us that overview effect without, leaving the atmosphere? A couple of weeks ago, Jane and I put out 2 episodes answering listener questions. And after those aired, a new question came in about life reviews and NDEs and whether either of us had ever experienced anything like that in our mediumship work. So I never had, and I checked in with Jane and she hadn't either. But that question really got me thinking about NDEs and what they offer us and what people who've had them come back knowing that the majority of us don't or haven't experienced. And everybody knows what an NDE is, right? It's a near-death experience. It's a really vivid, organized experience that happens when somebody is clinically dead or close to it. It can be like a cardiac arrest or a drowning or anesthesia, surgery, accident. But, it's really common, and it's been in the news a lot lately. I feel like I've seen NDEs on podcasts everywhere. So I just wanted to talk about it for a reason, and I'll bring that up later on. I bet many of you read the New York Times opinion piece last summer. It was called "What I Saw When I Peeked Over the Edge of Consciousness," which is exactly a title that I would read. And it was written by Jessica Gross about attending an IANDS conference in Chicago in 2025 with 700 NDEers. So IANDS stands for International Association of Near-Death Studies. And in this article, Gross explores the exodus of millions of Americans who are leaving organized religion over the past half century. And she makes the case that IANDS and the NDE community kind of fills that gap for people who are unsatisfied by mainstream religion. And what is interesting to me about that is that there's a group of people who have a physical experience, dying, the loss of function of the physical body, and that gives way to a spiritual awakening. But it's also a place where people who are grieving can find proof that we exist beyond the physical death, which means that their loved ones have most likely experienced something like this when they have passed over. And I think that that's really genuinely reassuring for somebody who's worried about what their loved one, what their person went through when they died. And Gross frames the conference as a place where NDEers or experiencers, grievers, spiritual explorers can meet with scientists and clinicians in an environment that's open and non-judgmental and full of curiosity and is really supportive. And she also mentions that at a dance party near the end of the conference, if you look around at the dance floor, you can tell who the survivors are, like who these people who'd gone through an NDE are. And it's because they kind of glow. They dance without any self-consciousness and they're completely blissed out, which is kind of funny because it takes knowing there's nothing to fear in death in order to fully inhabit life. And so I think that's part of the gift of an NDE. For those of you who aren't familiar with what actually happens during an NDE, let's talk about that. The experience is not happening before death or after resuscitation. It happens when the brain, by every medical measure, shouldn't be producing any consciousness at all. And so many of these reported spirit experiences have really striking things in common. So many report that there's an altered time in perception. So time stops making sense. There's no beginning or end to time. So many report exceptional speed of thought, not being slowed down by the mind, and the mind really has no limit anymore. Many report that their senses become so much more vivid and everything seems so much more real, which is funny that this isn't reality, that crossing over feels more real. And many report being separated from their bodies, watching it from above, meaning that their consciousness has left their bodies. And many report a life review, or encounter a presence or light, or feel wrapped in overwhelming love, or meet deceased loved ones. And the life review, which is what our listener was wanting to know about, is the part that I find really interesting, fascinating actually, because what they're describing is essentially experiencing their life from a place of non-judgment and radical empathy, and feeling what other people have been made to feel by you in your life, by your actions over your lifetime. And it's not really as punishment, but more as information, education, as love. That's not so different from what comes through in readings as a medium. The dead often want to acknowledge the impact that they had in their lifetime, and they want to talk about all the love that they still have. It's that same energy. And this is something that's really exciting to me about NDEs, is that there's been a ton of research. They've really been studied. And this gives validity to an experience that so many people have had. But, for a long time, and I think even just, 10 years ago when I was listening to NDEs, stories about them, people were saying, oh, it doesn't prove anything. It's nonsense. They're just having a hallucination. It's like a chemical reaction in their brain. But I feel like it's turning now. I feel like it's becoming more accepted. And Dr. Bruce Greyson, who wrote the book After, a doctor explores what near-death experiences reveal about life and beyond. He has provided so much research. He is a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia who spent 50 years studying near-death experiences. And he's the guy who's basically turned NDE research from the fringe into a legitimate scientific field. And he created the Greyson NDE scale, which is a 16 question measurement tool that has become the gold standard for defining and quantifying NDEs. It's also been translated into 20 languages and used in hundreds and hundreds of studies worldwide. So Dr. Bruce Greyson was also a co-founder of IANS, and he launched and edited the Journal of Near-Death Studies. It's the only peer-reviewed scholarly journal in the field, and he has published over 100 academic papers. And he is the reason why other researchers can build on each other's work rather than starting from scratch every time. So his book, if you guys have read that, I'm sure many of you have and have heard him. He's been on a bunch of podcasts. He never had an NDE himself, which makes his research pretty interesting to me because he went in as a skeptic. He went in trying to figure out what this is all about. And his entry point was a specific clinical experience early on in his career. I think it was like in the 1970s. A young woman who'd had an overdose came into the ER and she was completely unconscious. And Dr. Greyson went in to speak with her roommate down the hall. And when he came back, she had been resuscitated, and she told him that she'd been watching him the entire time from outside her body. And the proof that she gave was a spaghetti stain that he'd been trying to hide from his colleagues. And he had no explanation for how she could have possibly known that. So he dug into it. That was the part that cracked open his skepticism. And so we have 50 years of research because of that. Research has also looked at people who have had life-threatening experiences without the NDE to see if it could be just the simply dying part that creates these big changes. And it's not. Simply being close to death doesn't produce the changes that an NDE does. And there's something about the experience of the NDE and not just the being near death that creates this huge spiritual awakening. So some of the commonly reported experiences that NDEers, the changes that happen in their lives, is a loss of fear of death. And many have reported that that doesn't fade over time, rather it increases over time, which is interesting. They have a strengthened belief in life after death, which makes which makes total sense, losing the fear of death. They have a new or deepened sense of purpose or mission. They have a heightened self-esteem, which is so important. Increased compassion and love for others, less judgment, less concern about material gain or status or recognition, and a greater desire to serve others, and more in tune with emotions and feelings, a greater appreciation and zest for life, and a deeper sense of spirituality and a search for knowledge. And in one self-reported survey, NDEers report becoming more intuitive. You guys all have heard of Anita Moorjani, right? She is a really famous NDEer who was dying of cancer. She did die of cancer. She had her NDE and she came back in love with herself, in love with her life, full of compassion for herself, and in love with her body, and it was healed. So, if there's really something like being so in love with yourself, that is core. That is a core part of this. And then there's something else that I kind of already knew, but found documented as I was doing my internet dig on all of this. But studying NDEs transforms people too. You don't have to have an NDE. Just reading about it, studying it can transform you. Kenneth Ring, who is one of the original NDE researchers, found that his students were transformed in the same ways that NDEers were just by learning about the experiences. Not by having them, just by learning about them. And Dr. Penny Sartori confirmed the same thing happened to her over 17 years as an ICU nurse studying NDE patients. Do you guys feel like you are experiencing some spiritual awakening right now? I have met several mediums who are not always mediums, but then had an NDE and then they came online. In one of the professional mentorships that I was in, there was a woman who in the class, it was all on Zoom, but every time she appeared on the screen, I swear she was glowing. Like she just emanated that pure love frequency. And every word that came out of her mouth, everything she said in that class and every practice reading we ever exchanged, it was the same thing. I just felt like this love towards her and I could feel it beaming from her. And lo and behold, she'd had 2 NDEs. And we, many episodes, I think several seasons ago, we had on Mary Beth Pemberton. She is a playwright and she shared that she had an NDE. So she was on because she channels historical characters. It's such a cool way of getting information for a screenplay. Which is really, really inspiring. But she had an NDE and it wasn't like some magical cakewalk that made everything amazing overnight. She was saying that it was really hard for her to process it and come to terms with. So it wasn't it wasn't easy. I also want to share an article I read a couple weeks ago in the Huffington Post that I saved because it was interesting to me. It was about a woman who choked on her steak and had an NDE. So she describes being immersed in pure love. And I'm going to quote from the article here: not romantic or familiar love, but something vast, eternal, and all-encompassing. She experienced a life review, the kindness, the cruelties, the achievements, the failures, and overwhelming love. And this time, she wanted to make every mistake to end with compassion and empathy. She wanted to forgive and be forgiven. She saw herself clearly, a raw, unfiltered version of herself, and felt both melancholic and incredibly proud of the life she'd lived. But she'd also, in the article goes on to say that she also really suffered from the physical pain of the experience. And it wasn't easy. It made her really value her life, and she was really happy to return to her family. But that it didn't happen, that NDE didn't happen without a trade-off. Actually dying, I think, is pretty difficult. And I'll link that article in the show notes, and I'll also link everything else I've talked about if you want to go and check it out. But doesn't all this research, doesn't the after effects read like a description of the most spiritually evolved human you can imagine? Yeah, I don't know that I'd want to go through an NDE though to experience that. But as a medium, as someone who works, kind of in that same landscape, I do have some thoughts about what it means for the rest of us. And here's my sales pitch for mediumship, which we can all have access to, which we can all do. We're doing deliberately what an NDE does accidentally. Yeah, there are moments when I'm meditating or sitting in the power. For anyone who doesn't know what sitting in the power is, it's when mediums meditate to prepare for a reading. And when I tune in to that consciousness, kind of lose the ego self, I can really get into that groove, that feeling, that overwhelming feeling of unconditional love. And when I get a really strong link with spirit when I'm doing a reading and their loved one is sitting in front of me, usually on the other side of a computer screen, I feel that big, huge swell of unconditional love pour through me for the sitter from their loved one in spirit. And it really is such a miracle. It is one of the most extraordinary things I've ever experienced. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it sounds exactly like what NDEs describe in that overwhelming field of love. And NDE, it tears the veil open in one dramatic, involuntary moment. But mediumship, or any serious spiritual practice is more deliberate and it's slower. And it kind of does the same thing. And it can be done as a daily practice. I think it's all kind of the same place. And, the research, you don't even have to be changed by an NDE. Just learning about them does something. Which means that this episode, right now, it counts. You're already in it. It's rubbing off on you and me. We're currently right here, right now, in this present moment, benefiting from thinking about the expansion that is gained during an NDE. Have any of you had an NDE that opened you up to your intuition or to your mediumship? Or do you have a story that you can share about it? Do you know somebody who has had an NDE, who's changed, who has been healed by it? Or have you had a different kind of experience? A dream or a meditation or grief even that has given you your own version of the overview effect. It's the overview effect. Yeah, I genuinely want to know. So come find us on Instagram or on mediumcurious.com and leave us a comment. Share your story with us. We'd love to hear about it. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it. We need help getting this little podcast out there. Rate us, give us some stars, 5 of them. Leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts. Conversations like this might help somebody who needs to hear it right now. Someone who could be missing their loved one, wants to know what they experience, when they crossed over, or has no idea what to do with an experience that they've had. So if you could share it, that would be so helpful. And I'll link everything in the show notes that I was talking about. And until next time, dear ones, love you so much. Take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you later. Bye. Very Soul is our sponsor for Medium Curious. Jane and I are both Very Soul mediums.
Oh, yes, we are. verysoul.com, y'all. Inspired by spirit, guided by love, and brought to life by mediums.